When the fiercest storm in 30 years threatens to devastate Cedar Haven, the unexpected courage of an ex-firefighter, a determined little girl and a tireless Labrador will reveal that the greatest heroes don't always wear capes. On a night when nature seems invincible, it will be the bond between humans and their faithful canine companion that will decide who survives, and who is reborn. Are you ready for a story that will warm your heart and leave you breathless until the very last moment? The morning sky over Cedar Haven carried an ominous shade of gray that made Jack's fur stand on end. The black Labrador sat at attention by the bay window of the modest coastal home he shared with Ethan Walker, his keen eyes fixed on the approaching wall of dark clouds that loomed over the horizon. Something felt different about this storm. There was a heaviness in the air that made his trained instincts tingle with anticipation. Ethan Walker stood in the kitchen, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as he watched the local weather report with growing concern. At 58, his broad shoulders still carried the posture of his former profession, though his eyes held shadows of memories he'd rather forget. The meteorologist's voice crackled through the old radio, warning of an unprecedented weather system approaching the coast. Residents of Cedar Haven and surrounding areas are strongly advised to prepare for evacuation. This could be the strongest storm to hit the region in the past 30 years. Jack's low whine drew Ethan's attention. The former firefighter placed his mug down and walked over to his companion, his hand automatically finding the spot behind Jack's ears that usually brought comfort to them both. "I know, buddy. I feel it too." Across the street, through the gathering gloom, Lucy Carter was helping her mother, Rachel, board up their windows. The 10-year-old's pigtails bounced as she handed tools to her mother, her bright yellow raincoat a splash of defiant color against the darkening day. Jack watched them intently, his tail giving an occasional wag when Lucy looked their way and waved. "Mom, do you think Mr. Walker will help us finish before the storm hits?" Lucy's voice carried across the street, causing Ethan to stiffen slightly. Rachel glanced toward their house, hesitation clear in her expression. Since moving to Cedar Haven 6 months ago, Rachel and Lucy had become familiar figures in the neighborhood, but Ethan had maintained his distance. It wasn't personal, he kept everyone at arm's length these days. The weight of his past pressed down on him like the approaching storm clouds, a constant reminder of why he'd chosen solitude after retiring from the fire department. Jack nudged Ethan's hand with his nose, then looked meaningfully at their neighbors. The dog had always been better at reading situations than his human companion, and right now, he seemed determined to break through Ethan's self-imposed isolation. "They'll be fine," Ethan muttered, turning away from the window. But Jack's persistent whining made him look back. Rachel was struggling with a particularly large piece of plywood, while Lucy attempted to hold it steady against the strengthening wind. The first fat droplets of rain began to fall as Ethan finally sighed and reached for his jacket. All right, he conceded to Jack's insistent gaze. "But we're just helping with the windows," then coming straight back inside. As they crossed the street, Lucy's face lit up. "Jack," she exclaimed, abandoning her post to greet the Labrador. Jack's tail wagged furiously as he accepted her enthusiastic petting, though his eyes remained alert, scanning the darkening sky. "Mr. Walker," Rachel started, surprise evident in her voice. "You really don't have to." "The storm's coming in faster than predicted," Ethan interrupted, his voice gruff but not unkind. "These need to be secured properly." He took the plywood from her hands, his experienced eyes already assessing the best way to fortify the house. As they worked, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it the distant sound of emergency sirens. Jack's ears perked up at the sound, and Ethan's hands momentarily stilled on the hammer. For a brief moment, he was transported back to another storm, another rescue, another moment when nature had proven stronger than human determination. Lucy's small hand on his arm brought him back to the present. "Are you okay, Mr. Walker?" Her brown eyes showed a concern beyond her years, reminding him painfully of another young face from his past. Before he could respond, a massive thunderclap shook the air, causing Lucy to jump. Jack pressed against her legs protectively, his body tense with alertness. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind had picked up considerably. Rachel's phone buzzed with an emergency alert. "They're calling for immediate evacuation of the coastal areas," she announced, her voice tight with worry. "We need to get to the community center." Ethan looked at their partially secured house, then at the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. The smart thing would be to leave now, before the streets became impassable. But something in Jack's demeanor made him uneasy. The dog was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his eyes darting between Lucy and the storm clouds as if trying to communicate something vital. "We'll help you gather what you need," Ethan found himself saying, even as another crash of thunder rattled the windows. "Then we'll all head to the evacuation center together." As they hurried inside to pack essential supplies, none of them noticed the first signs of water beginning to seep under the garage door, or the way the storm drain at the corner was already overflowing. Nature was about to unleash its fury on Cedar Haven, and their lives were about to change in ways none of them could predict. Jack alone seemed to sense the true magnitude of what was coming. As he watched Lucy disappear into her house, his muscles tensed with an instinctive knowledge that this night would demand everything he had been trained for, and more. The rain hammered against the Carter house with increasing ferocity as Rachel rushed through rooms grabbing essential items, medications, important documents, a few changes of clothes. Lucy stood in her bedroom doorway, clutching her beloved stuffed orca, watching her mother's frantic movements with growing anxiety. "Mom, can I bring Splash?" Lucy's voice quivered slightly as she held up the worn plush toy. Rachel paused her hurried packing to look at her daughter, remembering how that same orca had helped Lucy sleep through their first difficult nights in Cedar Haven after the divorce. "Of course, sweetheart. Just one toy though, we need to travel light." Rachel zipped up their emergency bag, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing roar of the storm outside. In the living room, Ethan paced near the window while Jack sat perfectly still, his dark eyes following the movement of debris being swept down the street by increasingly powerful currents. The former firefighter's trained gaze noted how quickly the water level was rising, already reaching the bottom of car doors parked along the street. "Rachel," Ethan called out, his voice cutting through the storm's cacophony. "We need to move. Now." Years of emergency response experience told him they were running out of time. The lights flickered ominously as Rachel and Lucy descended the stairs. Jack's head snapped up, a low whine escaping his throat. Before anyone could react, the power went out completely, plunging the house into storm-darkened shadows. "Everyone stay calm," Ethan's authoritative voice filled the darkness. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating worried faces. "Rachel, do you have everything essential?" "Yes, I think so." A tremendous crash from outside cut her off. Through the window, they could see a large branch had smashed into a parked car, setting off its alarm. The sound mingled with the howling wind, creating an eerie symphony of destruction. "We'll take my truck," Ethan decided, his old instincts taking over. "It sits higher than your car, Rachel. The community center is only 15 minutes away if we..." Another crash, louder this all, shook the house. Jack barked sharply, causing Lucy to jump and drop Splash. The stuffed orca bounced down the last few stairs and rolled toward the kitchen, where water was now visibly seeping under the door. "I'll get him," Lucy called out, darting after her toy before anyone could stop her. "Lucy, wait." Rachel moved to follow, but Ethan grabbed her arm. "The kitchen floor's already flooded. I'll get her." He handed Rachel his flashlight. "Get to the truck. Jack, stay with her." But Jack had other ideas. As Ethan moved toward the kitchen, the Labrador was already ahead of him, powerful muscles propelling him through the ankle-deep water that had invaded the room. The kitchen door burst open with explosive force, propelled by a surge of water that knocked both man and dog off their feet. The flashlight beam from the living room caught Lucy's terrified face as she was swept toward the open door, her small hand still clutching Splash. "Lucy!" Three voices cried out in unison as the current pulled her through the doorway into the tempest outside. Jack recovered first, his powerful legs pushing against the flood as he charged after her. "No. Jack, wait." Ethan's command was lost in the storm's fury as the black Labrador disappeared into the darkness after Lucy. Rachel's scream pierced the chaos. "My baby! Oh God, my baby!" She fought against the current trying to reach the door, but Ethan's strong arms held her back. "Rachel, stop. You'll be swept away too." His voice cracked with the effort of restraining her. "The current's too strong, we need help." Through the open door, they could hear Lucy's frightened calls growing fainter, punctuated by Jack's determined barking. The sound of emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but Ethan knew with sickening certainty that help wouldn't arrive in time. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, muscle memory dialing the fire department's direct line. "This is former Chief Walker. We have a child swept away by flood waters on Maple Street, near the intersection with Ocean Drive. Black Labrador rescue dog in pursuit. I repeat, child in water." As he relayed their location, Ethan's mind raced with horrible clarity. The creek that ran behind the houses would be overflowing its banks, creating a deadly channel of rushing water. If Lucy was swept into that. The same thoughts seemed to occur to Rachel, who had collapsed against the wall, her face a mask of terror. "The creek, she can't swim well enough, oh God, please." Ethan's guilt and trauma threatened to paralyze him as memories of his last failed rescue crashed over him like the flood waters outside. But this time was different. This time, Jack was out there, trained, determined, and somehow knowing exactly what needed to be done. "Rachel, listen to me." Ethan gripped her shoulders, forcing her to focus. "Jack is one of the best water rescue dogs I've ever trained. He won't let anything happen to Lucy. But we need to be smart about this, we have to get to higher ground and coordinate with rescue services." Through her tears, Rachel nodded, drawing on a mother's strength to push aside panic and focus on action. Together, they fought their way through the flooded kitchen to Ethan's truck, the storm raging around them with increasing violence. As Ethan gunned the engine, fighting to keep the vehicle steady on the flooded street, his jaw clenched with determination. He had failed someone once before in a storm like this. He wouldn't fail again. Somewhere in the darkness, Jack was fighting to save Lucy, and this time, Ethan would make damn sure the story had a different ending. The truck's headlights cut through the curtain of rain, illuminating streets that had become rivers and familiar landmarks transformed into shadowy islands. Above the engine's roar, they could still hear the faint echo of Jack's barking, leading them toward whatever fate awaited in the storm's dark heart. Jack's powerful legs pushed against the current as he followed Lucy's scent through the chaos. The rain made tracking difficult, but his training kicked in as he focused on the mix of strawberry shampoo and fear that marked the girl's trail. The water was rising rapidly, turning familiar streets into treacherous rivers, but the Labrador's determined eyes never lost their focus. A flash of yellow caught his attention, Lucy's raincoat, snagged momentarily on a submerged fence before being torn away by the current. Jack barked sharply, marking the location in his mind as he continued his pursuit. The creek was ahead, and his instincts told him that's where the water was carrying her. Meanwhile, Ethan's truck fought through the flood waters, wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. Rachel sat beside him, her knuckles white as she gripped the dashboard, eyes scanning desperately through the darkness. "The creek splits at Madison Bridge," Ethan explained, his voice tight with concentration. "If Lucy was swept into the main channel." He couldn't finish the sentence. The image of another child, lost in another storm, threatened to overwhelm him. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts, all units responding to multiple water rescues. Madison Bridge area completely flooded. Bridge stability compromised. Rachel's sob cut through the static. "She's just a little girl, she's so scared of deep water." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I lost someone once," he found himself saying, the words spilling out after years of silence. A boy, Tommy Reynolds. Storm like this, 5 years ago. I was fire chief then. Thought I could save everyone. The truck swerved slightly as they hit a deeper section of water. Rachel steadied herself, looking at Ethan's profile in the dim light. What happened? Water was too strong. Swept him right out of my hands. Ethan's voice cracked. I resigned the next day. Couldn't face another rescue, another possible failure. But you're here now, Rachel whispered. Because of Jack, Ethan replied, surprising himself with the realization. He never lost his instinct to help, even when I lost mine. Several blocks away, Jack had reached the creek, now a raging torrent that had burst its banks. The Labrador's keen ears picked up a sound, a child's cry, barely audible over the storm. He barked loudly, hoping the sound would reach Lucy, let her know help was coming. The cry came again, stronger this time, from the direction of old Wilson's boathouse. Jack plunged through the current, his black coat sleek with rain as he fought his way toward the sound. The boathouse was partially submerged, its wooden structure creaking ominously in the wind. Jack! Jack, help! Lucy's voice was clearer now. She had managed to climb onto a floating dock attached to the boathouse, but the platform was breaking apart under the battering of debris and waves. The Labrador's training told him not to approach directly, the unstable dock could collapse under additional weight. Instead, he barked repeatedly, marking the location while searching for a safer approach. His own fear of deep water, developed after a near-drowning incident during training, pushed against his resolve, but Lucy's presence pulled him forward. Back in the truck, Ethan and Rachel had reached the emergency command center set up at the high school. Fire trucks and rescue vehicles filled the parking lot, their lights cutting through the darkness. Chief Anderson, Ethan's successor, rushed to meet them. Walker. Didn't expect to see you in something like this again. Anderson's surprise was evident even through the rain. My dog's out there tracking a missing girl, Ethan replied, his voice finding its old authority. Lucy Carter, 10 years old, last seen near Maple Street. Jack's following her toward the creek. Anderson's expression grew grave. The creek's overflowed its banks. We've got reports of structural damage at several points, including the boathouse, Ethan finished, a cold certainty settling in his gut. It's the only structure near the creek that might offer shelter. Rachel stepped forward, rain plastering her hair to her face. Then what are we waiting for? Ma'am, we can't send boats out in this current, Anderson explained gently. The risk of. Like hell we can't. Ethan's voice cut through the excuses. Get me a radio and a rescue kit. I know that creek better than anyone. And I know my dog, if he's found Lucy, he'll keep her safe until we get there. As if in response to his words, a series of distinct barks carried over the storm's roar. Ethan's heart leaped, he recognized Jack's rescue signal, the pattern they'd practiced countless times during training. 3 sharp barks, pause, 2 barks, he translated for Anderson. He's found her. She's alive but in immediate danger. The years of training and experience flooded back, pushing aside the paralysis of guilt and fear. The boathouse has an emergency cache of life vests and basic rescue equipment in a waterproof locker. I installed it myself, back when you were chief, Anderson nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He turned to his team. Get Walker geared up. Murray, Preston, you're going with him. We'll coordinate from here and get emergency medical on standby. As the rescue team scrambled to prepare, Ethan found himself facing Rachel. Her eyes were red with tears, but her voice was steady. Bring her back. Please. I will, Ethan promised, and for the first time in 5 years, he fully believed in his own words. Jack found her. Now it's my turn to finish what he started. The storm raged on as Ethan donned familiar rescue gear, his movements automatic despite the years away. Somewhere in the darkness, Jack was holding his position, keeping Lucy safe, waiting for his human partner to arrive. This time, Ethan swore, the storm wouldn't win. This time, he had a second chance to make things right. Lucy huddled against the boathouse wall, her yellow raincoat providing little warmth against the biting wind and rain. The floating dock creaked ominously beneath her, pieces of wood splintering off with each powerful wave. Through the storm's chaos, she could see Jack's dark form moving along the shoreline, his steady barking a lifeline in the darkness. "Good boy, Jack," she whispered, clutching Splash tighter to her chest. The stuffed orca was soaking wet but somehow still providing comfort. "Please don't leave me." As if hearing her plea, Jack barked again, this time with more urgency. He had spotted something in the water, a massive tree branch heading straight for the dock's supporting beams. The Labrador's muscles tensed as he calculated the distance. Training told him to wait for backup, but instinct said there wasn't time. Meanwhile, Ethan and the rescue team were fighting their way through the flood waters in a reinforced rescue boat. Murray handled the motor while Preston maintained radio contact with command. The boat's spotlight cut through the darkness, revealing the devastation the storm had wreaked on their small town. "Walker," Murray shouted over the engine's roar, "that support beam you installed at the creek bend, how solid is it?" Ethan's mind raced through calculations. Rated for Category 4 hurricane conditions. But with this debris load. He gestured at the chunks of wood and metal rushing past them. "We can't count on it holding." The radio crackled. "Rescue 1, be advised, dam operators report increased water release. Expect surge in approximately 10 minutes. "Copy that," Preston responded before turning to his teammates. "That surge hits the boathouse, whole structure could go." Back at the command center, Rachel paced in front of the emergency vehicles, her shoes squelching with each step. Chief Anderson approached with a fresh cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Mrs. Carter, you should get inside. Weather's only getting worse." Rachel shook her head. "My daughter is out there. I need to." She trailed off, unsure what she needed except to do something. Anderson's radio buzzed. "Chief, we've got problems at the North Evacuation Center. Roof damage reported. Send units 3 and 4, he ordered, then turned back to Rachel. "Your daughter's got the best looking for her. Walker, he was legendary before he quit. And that dog of his? Never seen anything like him." At the boathouse, Jack had made his decision. The branch was seconds from impact when he launched himself into the churning water. Swimming against the current, he reached the dock just as Lucy screamed, the branch had struck, and the platform was starting to break apart. "Jack!" Lucy cried out as the dock tilted precariously. The Labrador fought his way to her, his powerful body providing a stable presence against the chaos. Somewhere in the darkness, they heard the distinctive sound of a rescue boat's engine. Jack barked sharply, 3 times, pause, 2 times, the signal they'd been training him to use for years. "That's Jack." Preston called out, pointing the spotlight toward the sound. The beam caught the reflection of Lucy's raincoat and Jack's wet fur just as another section of the dock collapsed. Ethan's heart stopped as he saw Lucy stumble, nearly falling into the raging water. But Jack was there, his teeth gently but firmly gripping her raincoat, keeping her upright. The sight stirred something deep in Ethan's soul, the part of him that had been buried under guilt and fear for 5 long years. "Murray, bring us in from the downstream side," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless rescue operations. "Preston, get the rescue line ready. We've got one shot at this." The boat's motor growled as Murray navigated the treacherous current. Debris crashed against the hull, each impact a reminder of nature's raw power. Through it all, Jack maintained his position, his body shielding Lucy from the worst of the wind and rain. "Lucy!" Ethan called out as they drew closer. "Honey, we're coming for you. Just stay with Jack." The girl looked up, her face pale but determined. Mr. Walker. Jack found me, he stayed with me. That's right, sweetheart. He's not going anywhere, and neither are we. Ethan began unclipping his safety line, but Preston grabbed his arm. Walker, protocol says, protocol doesn't account for a partially collapsed dock and an incoming surge. Ethan cut him off. I'm lighter than you, and I know this dog. He'll work with me. Before anyone could argue further, a massive shudder ran through what remained of the boathouse. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as another support gave way. Now or never, Ethan muttered, securing the rescue line to his harness. With practiced movements, he slipped into the water, fighting the current as he made his way toward Lucy and Jack. The cold hit him like a physical blow, bringing back memories of that terrible night 5 years ago. For a moment, he was paralyzed, the weight of the water, the screams, the failure. Then Jack barked again, the sound cutting through Ethan's flashback like a lighthouse beam through fog. This was different. This time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had a partner who hadn't given up on saving lives. Lucy, listen carefully, Ethan called out as he drew closer. When I count to 3, I need you to do exactly what I say. Jack knows what to do, he'll help you. Do you trust us? Lucy looked at Jack, then back at Ethan. Despite her terror, despite the storm raging around them, she nodded. I trust you both. The dock groaned again, and in the distance, they could hear the growing roar of the approaching surge. Time was running out, but in that moment, as human and dog worked in perfect sync to save a child's life, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that they would not fail. The world narrowed to this single moment. Ethan's muscles strained against the current as he positioned himself near the failing dock. Jack maintained his protective stance beside Lucy, his dark eyes locked on his partner, waiting for the signal they had practiced countless times in calmer waters. Okay, Lucy, Ethan called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. On 3, you're going to hold on to me exactly like we're about to practice. Jack will help guide you. Ready? Lucy nodded, her small fingers white-knuckled around Splash. The stuffed orca had become her anchor in the storm, much like Jack had become her guardian. 1. Ethan secured his position, feeling the rescue line taut behind him. 2. Jack shifted slightly, positioning himself to support Lucy's movement. Before Ethan could reach 3, a deafening crack split the air. The dock's main support beam, weakened by the relentless battering of debris, finally gave way. Lucy screamed as the platform lurched violently to one side. Now! Ethan shouted, abandoning the count. In that chaotic moment, years of training took over. Jack moved with incredible precision, using his body to guide Lucy as she half jumped, half fell toward Ethan. The former fire chief caught her securely, immediately turning to protect her from the spray of splintered wood as the dock collapsed behind them. I've got you, sweetheart. I've got you, Ethan repeated, feeling Lucy's arms wrap tightly around his neck. But their position was far from secure, the current was strengthening, and the promised surge was approaching. Pull us in. Ethan shouted to the rescue boat, where Murray and Preston were already working the lines. Jack swam circles around them, helping to break the current's force. Then disaster struck again. A massive piece of debris, what looked like part of someone's roof, came hurtling through the darkness. Murray saw it coming and tried to warn them. Walker. 9 o'clock. Ethan turned, but with Lucy in his arms, his movements were too slow. The debris was going to hit them directly. In that split second, he made the only choice he could, he turned his back to the impact, shielding Lucy with his body. But the collision never came. Instead, they heard a sharp yelp as Jack launched himself into the debris' path, using his powerful body to deflect it just enough to miss them. The impact sent the Labrador tumbling through the water. Jack! Lucy's scream pierced the night. The dog disappeared beneath the churning surface. Ethan's heart clenched, but he couldn't lose focus, not with Lucy's life in his hands. "Murray! Get us in now!" The rescue boat's motor roared as they began their approach. Ethan kicked hard, fighting to keep Lucy's head above water as waves crashed over them. The girl was sobbing against his neck, calling for Jack. "He'll be okay," Ethan assured her, though his own voice cracked with worry. "Jack's the strongest swimmer I know." As if summoned by their faith, a black head broke the surface several yards downstream. Jack was struggling, clearly injured from the impact, but his eyes remained fixed on Ethan and Lucy. The Labrador began swimming toward them, each stroke a testament to his determination. Finally, Preston managed to grab Ethan's rescue line, helping to pull them toward the boat. "Watch the starboard side," he warned as another wave threatened to slam them against the hull. With a tremendous effort, they managed to get Lucy safely into the boat. The moment she was secure, Ethan turned back to the water, searching for Jack. The Labrador was still swimming, but his movements were becoming erratic. "He's hurt," Ethan realized with growing horror. Without hesitation, he pulled his rescue line taut again. "Murray, bring us about. We need to reach him." But the current was strengthening by the second. The roar of the approaching surge was getting louder, and Jack was being swept further away. "Walker, we can't risk it," Murray shouted over the storm. "That surge hits while we're sideways, he risked everything for us." Lucy's voice rose above the chaos. She stood in the boat, her yellow raincoat gleaming in the spotlight as she called out to Jack. "Please, please don't leave him." In the beam of the spotlight, they could see Jack fighting to stay afloat. The proud Labrador who had never failed a rescue was now the one in need of saving. His eyes met Ethan's across the turbulent water, and in that moment, Ethan saw not just his partner, but every life they had saved together, every training session, every quiet moment of healing after his resignation. "Preston, take the line," Ethan ordered, already stripping off his heavier rescue gear. "Murray, get us as close as you can without compromising the boat. Lucy, honey, I need you to sit down and hold tight." "But Mr. Walker, trust me," he said, his voice gentler now. "Just like you trusted us before. I'm not leaving him behind." The boat's motor growled as Murray carefully maneuvered them into position. The surge was nearly upon them, they could see the wall of water approaching in the distance, carrying with it even more debris. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past failures trying to hold him back. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't fighting against his fears, he was fighting for someone who had never given up on him. "Hold on, boy," he whispered, preparing himself for what would either be a rescue or a reckoning. "Your partner's coming." The rescue boat's spotlight cut through the rain, illuminating Jack's struggling form in the churning waters. Ethan stood at the boat's edge, every muscle tense as Murray navigated them closer to the injured Labrador. The roar of the approaching surge grew louder, a constant reminder of their dwindling time. 20 seconds till impact. Preston shouted, monitoring the water level gauges. "Walker, if you're going in, it has to be now." Lucy clutched the boat's railing, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Please save him, Mr. Walker. He saved me, he can't die." The word "die" hit Ethan like a physical blow. Images of Tommy Reynolds flashed through his mind, another rescue, another impossible choice. But this time, the face in the water belonged to someone who had never given up on him, even when he'd given up on himself. "Murray, cut the engine on my mark." Ethan secured his secondary rescue line, lighter than the standard gear. "Keep the bow pointed upstream. Preston, be ready with the life ring." Jack's swimming was becoming more labored, his injured side clearly hampering his movements. Yet his eyes remained locked on Ethan, filled with the same unwavering trust they'd shared through countless rescues. "Mark!" Ethan called. As the engine died, he dove into the frigid water. The current immediately tried to sweep him away, but years of training took over. Ethan cut through the water with powerful strokes, using the debris patterns he'd learned to read decades ago to navigate the flow. Jack tried to swim toward him, but his strength was failing. "Stay there, boy," Ethan called out. "Let me come to you." A massive tree branch swept between them, forcing Ethan to dive beneath it. When he surfaced, he'd lost sight of Jack. For one terrifying moment, he thought history was repeating itself, another life slipping away in dark waters. Then he heard it, a weak bark, more of a whimper really, coming from his left. Jack had managed to catch himself on a partially submerged fence, but the position left him vulnerable to the approaching surge. "Walker." Preston's voice carried over the storm. "Surge is almost here. You've got seconds." Ethan pushed himself harder, fighting against every current, every fear. He was almost within reach of Jack when the fence began to give way under the dog's weight. "No." The word tore from Ethan's throat as Jack lost his hold. But this time, instead of freezing in panic, Ethan dove. Under the water, everything was chaos and darkness. His hands found fur, then muscle. Jack didn't struggle as Ethan got a grip on him, even injured, even terrified, the dog trusted his partner completely. They broke the surface together, Ethan gasping for air while maintaining his hold on Jack. The Labrador's tail weakly thumped against him, a gesture of relief despite their dire situation. "I've got him," Ethan shouted toward the boat. "Pull us in." Preston and Murray began reeling in the rescue line, but they were fighting against the strengthening current. The surge's leading edge was visible now, a wall of water carrying an apocalyptic amount of debris. "It's too strong," Murray shouted. "Line's starting to fray." Lucy's voice suddenly rose above the chaos. "Jack! Mr. Walker! Look at me!" She was holding Splash over the side of the boat, the stuffed orca's familiar shape a beacon in the darkness. "Follow Splash home." Something in Jack stirred at Lucy's voice. Despite his injury, the Labrador began paddling weakly, helping Ethan fight the current. Every stroke seemed to cost him, but he kept his eyes fixed on Lucy and her toy, the very things he'd risked his life to protect. The surge hit with the force of a freight train. Ethan felt himself being pulled under, but he maintained his grip on Jack. This time would be different. This time, he wouldn't let go. "Now!" Preston shouted, and Murray gunned the engine in perfect synchronization with a tremendous heave on the rescue line. The combination of power and timing was enough. Ethan felt themselves being lifted, water streaming from his clothes and Jack's fur as they were pulled over the boat's side. They crashed onto the deck in a tangle of limbs and relief. Lucy was there instantly, crying as she threw her arms around Jack's neck. The Labrador's tail wagged weakly as he tried to lick her face, ever the protector even in his exhausted state. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, his hands quickly checking Jack for injuries. The dog's right side was badly bruised from the impact with the debris, but nothing seemed broken. "You did good. You did so good." "Walker," Murray called from the helm, "hate to break this up, but we've got more company." He pointed at the surge's aftermath, a new wave of debris heading their way, including what looked like an entire shed. "Get us out of here," Ethan ordered, wrapping an emergency blanket around Lucy while keeping one hand on Jack. "Standard evacuation route to the community center." As Murray steered them toward safer waters, Lucy looked up at Ethan, her eyes wise beyond her years. "You came back for him," she said simply. "Even though you were scared." Ethan met Jack's tired but trusting gaze. "That's what partners do," he replied, something healing in his chest as he said the words. "We don't leave each other behind." The boat pushed through the turbulent waters, its occupants battered but alive. In the distance, emergency lights painted the rain in red and blue, marking the path home. The storm still raged around them, but its power to terrify had diminished. They had faced their worst fears and emerged stronger, not alone, but together. Jack rested his head on Ethan's lap, his breathing steady despite his ordeal. With each rise and fall of the dog's chest, Ethan felt the weight of his past failures losing their grip. He hadn't frozen. He hadn't failed. This time, when it mattered most, he had been the partner Jack always believed he could be. The community center's floodlights cut through the rain as Murray guided the rescue boat toward the makeshift dock. The building sat on Cedar Haven's highest ground, its brick walls a beacon of safety in the storm. Rachel Carter paced near the entrance, her silhouette visible through the sheets of rain. "Mom!" Lucy's voice carried across the water as soon as she spotted her mother. Jack, despite his injuries, lifted his head at her cry, his tail thumping weakly against the boat's floor. "Careful," Ethan warned as the girl shifted excitedly. "We're not quite," his words were cut short by a violent shudder that ran through the boat. Murray swore, wrestling with the controls as something large struck the hull beneath the waterline. Debris field from the surge. Preston called out, scanning the water with his spotlight. "The whole marina broke loose, we've got boats, docks, everything coming downstream." The rescue boat's motor groaned as Murray tried to navigate through the obstacle course of floating wreckage. Each impact sent tremors through the vessel, making Lucy clutch tighter to Jack's fur. "Engine struggling," Murray reported grimly. "That last hit might have damaged the propeller." Ethan's mind raced through options. They were close to safety, but the current was pushing them toward the community center's outer wall. If they hit it at this speed. "Cut the engine," he ordered, already moving toward the bow with the rescue line. "Preston, get ready with the secondary line. We'll have to thread the needle." Rachel's voice carried over the storm as she realized their situation. "Lucy. Baby, hold on. Stay back, Mrs. Carter." Chief Anderson called out, rushing forward with his team to secure the area. "Walker. What do you need?" "Clear the dock." Ethan shouted back, his voice carrying the authority of his former position. "And get me 2 anchoring points, we're coming in hot." The boat drifted sideways in the current, giving them one chance to align with the makeshift dock. Jack struggled to his feet, pain forgotten as his training kicked in. He moved to Lucy's side, using his body to brace her against the boat's violent movement. "Now." Ethan threw the first line. It arced through the rain, caught perfectly by Anderson's team. The rope pulled taut, but the current strength threatened to snap it. Preston launched the second line toward the other anchoring point. For a moment, it looked like it would fall short, then a figure darted forward, snatching it from the air. "Got it." Rachel's voice rang out as she wrapped the rope around a sturdy pole, her mother's instinct overriding any concern for protocol. The boat's hull scraped against submerged debris as they used the lines to pull themselves in. Metal groaned against metal, but slowly, steadily, they approached the dock. "Lucy," Ethan said calmly, though his muscles strained against the rope, "when I tell you, you're going to jump to your mother. Jack will help you. Ready?" The girl nodded, her small hand gripping Splash tightly. Jack positioned himself behind her, just as he had done at the boathouse. The boat lurched one final time, bringing them alongside the dock. "Now." Lucy leaped, guided by Jack's gentle nudge. Rachel caught her daughter in her arms, both of them collapsing onto the wet concrete in a tangle of tears and relieved laughter. "My baby, my brave, brave baby," Rachel sobbed, covering Lucy's face with kisses. The rest of the rescue team quickly secured the boat and helped its remaining occupants onto solid ground. Jack limped onto the dock, immediately looking for Lucy despite his obvious pain. The girl wiggled free from her mother's embrace just long enough to throw her arms around the Labrador's neck. "You saved me," she whispered into his wet fur. "You're the bravest dog ever." Ethan watched the reunion, emotion thick in his throat. Then he noticed Jack's limp becoming more pronounced. "We need a vet," he called out to Anderson. "Jack took a bad hit protecting us." "Medical team's inside," Anderson replied. "They can stabilize him until we can get him to the animal hospital." He paused, looking at his former chief with newfound respect. That was one hell of a rescue, Walker. Both of them. Before Ethan could respond, the radio on Anderson's belt crackled to life. Chief, we've got problems at the North Bridge. Water's rising fast, and we've got reports of trapped civilians in the River Road apartments. The words hung in the rain-soaked air. River Road was the lowest-lying residential area in Cedar Haven, home to mostly elderly residents who might have ignored the evacuation orders. Ethan felt the familiar pull of duty, but his eyes went to Jack, who was now receiving initial treatment from a medic. The dog's dark eyes met his, and despite the pain, there was still that same unwavering dedication to service. Walker, Anderson said quietly, I know you're retired, but I could use your experience on this. Those apartments, you know the layout better than anyone. Rachel stepped forward, still holding Lucy close. We'll stay with Jack, she offered. Make sure he gets proper care. It's the least we can do. Lucy looked up at Ethan, her eyes serious. You have to help them, Mr. Walker. Just like Jack helped me. The former fire chief felt something shift inside him, the last pieces of his old fear falling away, replaced by a sense of purpose he'd thought lost forever. Jack had shown him that true courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about moving forward despite the fear. Get me a fresh radio and rescue gear, he told Anderson. And contact the senior living coordinator, Helen Banks. She'll know who might have stayed behind. As the rescue team mobilized for their next mission, Ethan knelt beside Jack. The Labrador tried to stand, his instinct to join his partner as strong as ever. Not this time, boy, Ethan said softly, gently pushing him back down. You've done your part. Rest now. I'll carry on from here. Jack whined softly but settled, his trust in his partner absolute. Lucy sat down beside him, carefully stroking his wet fur while Rachel helped the medic apply bandages. I'll be back soon, Ethan promised, both to Jack and to himself. The storm still raged outside, its fury undiminished, but something had changed. The man who had once run from such challenges now walked purposefully toward them, carrying with him the courage his four-legged partner had helped him rediscover. The River Road apartments loomed before them, a three-story building partially swallowed by the swollen creek. Ethan stood in the rescue boat with Chief Anderson, studying the structure with experienced eyes. The bottom floor was already submerged, and water was creeping up the second-floor windows. Helen Banks confirms 3 residents unaccounted for, Anderson reported, checking his tablet. 2 on the second floor, 1 on the third. Dorothy Chen, 78, apartment 2C. Robert and Virginia Winters, both 82, apartment 3A. Ethan nodded, memories flooding back. Dorothy's the retired school teacher. Stubborn as they come, probably thought she could wait it out. The Winters. Robert's got mobility issues. They might have had trouble evacuating. Meanwhile, back at the community center, Jack lay on a makeshift bed in the medical area, his injured side carefully bandaged. Lucy sat cross-legged beside him, reading from a worn copy of Old Yeller she'd found in the center's small library. Rachel watched them from nearby, struck by how the traumatic night had somehow strengthened rather than broken her daughter's spirit. And that was when I realized, Lucy read, her small voice steady, that a dog's love is the purest kind there is. That's just like you, Jack. You didn't even think about getting hurt when you saved me. Jack's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, his dark eyes never leaving Lucy's face. Despite the pain medication making him drowsy, he remained alert, as if still on duty. Back at River Road, the rescue operation was underway. Ethan and 2 other firefighters, Rodriguez and Chen, made their way through the building's emergency stairwell. Water lapped at their knees, making each step treacherous. Dorothy! Ethan called out as they reached the second floor. Dorothy Chen. Fire department. A faint voice responded from down the hallway. In here. The doors stuck. They found Dorothy in 2C, her apartment door warped by water damage. The elderly woman had pushed her furniture against the windows as makeshift barriers against the storm, but water was still seeping in. "Mrs. Chen," Ethan said as they forced the door open, "you should have evacuated hours ago." Dorothy, her gray hair in a neat bun despite the chaos, managed a sheepish smile. "Well, if it isn't Ethan Walker. Thought you'd retired from all this heroics business." "Had a good teacher recently," Ethan replied, helping her into a rescue harness. "Learned that sometimes the bravest thing is to come back." At the community center, Lucy had dozed off beside Jack, her hand still resting in his fur. The Labrador remained awake, occasionally lifting his head at sounds from outside, his instinct to help warring with his injuries. Rachel draped a blanket over her daughter, then sat beside them. "You know," she said softly to Jack, "when we moved here after the divorce, I worried about Lucy. She was so withdrawn, so quiet. But watching you with her tonight, you didn't just save her life, you helped her find her courage." Jack's tail wagged gently as Rachel scratched behind his ears. Through the windows, lightning illuminated the continuing storm, and the dog's muscles tensed. "He's worried about Mr. Walker," Lucy mumbled, half asleep. "But Mr. Walker's being brave now, just like Jack taught him." The rescue at River Road continued as Ethan's team reached the third floor. The Winters were found in their apartment, Robert in his wheelchair and Virginia refusing to leave his side. The floor beneath them groaned ominously with each wave that struck the building. "Buildings becoming unstable," Rodriguez reported over the radio. "We need to move, now." Ethan looked at Robert and Virginia, their hands clasped together despite the chaos, and made a quick decision. "Rodriguez, help Mrs. Winters." "I'll handle Mr. Winters' wheelchair." "Walker, that chair's too heavy for these conditions," Chen protested. "So we adapt." Ethan turned to Robert. "Sir, I know you rely on this chair, but right now we need to prioritize your life. Will you trust me to carry you?" Robert looked at his wife of 60 years, then nodded. "Lead the way, son." Back at the community center, Jack suddenly lifted his head, ears perked. Through the storm's fury, he'd picked up the distant sound of emergency sirens, lots of them. Lucy stirred. "What is it, Jack?" Rachel moved to the window, peering through the rain. In the distance, multiple emergency vehicles were converging on River Road, their lights painting the rain in urgent colors. Jack whined softly, attempting to stand despite his injuries. Lucy wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "Mr. Walker's different now. He won't give up, just like you never gave up on him." The evacuation of River Road became a race against time. The building's structural integrity was failing faster than anticipated. Ethan carried Robert while Rodriguez and Chen helped Dorothy and Virginia. Water pursued them down the stairwell, bringing debris and danger with each floor they descended. Almost there, Ethan encouraged as they reached the ground floor. The water was chest deep now, and he had to fight to keep Robert's head above the surface. A thunderous crack echoed through the building. Part of the third floor was collapsing, sending cascades of water and debris down the stairwell they just descended. "Move!" Ethan shouted, pushing forward through the current. His muscles screamed in protest, but Jack's example of unwavering dedication drove him on. They wouldn't lose anyone tonight. Hours later, as dawn began to lighten the storm clouds, Lucy woke to find Jack standing at the community center's window, his bandaged side forgotten as he watched the approach of emergency vehicles. "Mom! They're back!" Through the glass, they could see Ethan helping elderly residents from rescue boats. He was soaked, exhausted, but standing tall. When he looked toward the community center, his eyes found the window where Jack stood watching. The former fire chief raised his hand in a quiet salute to his partner. Jack's tail wagged in response, and Lucy could have sworn the dog was smiling. "He came back different," Lucy observed, hugging Jack carefully to avoid his injuries. "Just like in the stories, the hero has to go through something hard to find out who they really are." Rachel watched as more rescue boats arrived, bringing survivors from other parts of town. The storm was finally beginning to weaken, but its impact had forever changed their community, and the people in it. Sometimes, she said, running her hand along Jack's back, the real heroes are the ones who show us how to be brave. Even if they can't say it in words. The first rays of morning sunlight broke through the dissipating storm clouds, illuminating a transformed Cedar Haven. Streets had become canals, homes stood partially submerged, and debris scattered across the landscape told stories of the night's fury. But at the community center, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Ethan sat on the floor beside Jack's bed, his rescue gear still dripping water. The Labrador's tail thumped steadily against the blankets despite his injuries, his joy at reuniting with his partner evident in every movement. Lucy had finally fallen into a deep sleep on a nearby cot, Splash clutched tightly in her arms. "The vet's on her way," Rachel said softly, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Ethan. They managed to clear the road from the animal hospital. "Thank you," Ethan replied, accepting the coffee with hands that still trembled slightly from exhaustion. Not just for the coffee. For staying with him. For understanding. Rachel sat down beside them, watching her daughter sleep. Understanding what? That I had to go back out there. That Jack needed to stay here, even though. He trailed off, his free hand gently stroking the dog's head. Even though he's always been your strength. Rachel finished. She smiled at Jack, who was fighting to keep his eyes open. "I think tonight he learned that you're his strength too." The community center bustled with activity around them. The rescued residents from River Road were being checked by medical staff, with Dorothy Chen holding court among them, already turning the night's events into a story worth telling. "You know," Dorothy called out, catching Ethan's eye, "I had that young man in my 4th grade class. Always trying to save everything, lost kittens, injured birds, even tried to rescue the class goldfish during a power outage." She chuckled. Some things never change. Robert Winters, settled in a borrowed wheelchair with Virginia by his side, added his own thoughts. "Wouldn't be here if he hadn't come back. Him and that dog of his, gave this old man a second chance at more mornings with my girl." Virginia squeezed her husband's hand, tears in her eyes. 60 years together, and thanks to them, we'll have more. Chief Anderson entered the center, bringing with him the first comprehensive reports of the storm's impact. "Walker," he called out, making his way through the crowd. "Got some news you'll want to hear." Ethan carefully stood, his muscles protesting every movement. "How bad?" "Property damage is extensive, but no casualties." Anderson's voice carried pride and relief. "Every person reported missing has been accounted for. The rescue teams you helped coordinate after River Road, they got everyone out." The news rippled through the center, bringing with it the first real sense of hope since the storm began. Lucy stirred on her cot, blinking awake to the sound of relieved conversations and muted celebrations. "Mr. Walker," she called out softly, still half asleep. "Did we win?" Ethan smiled, really smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. "Yeah, sweetheart. We won." The arrival of Dr. Diana Reynolds, the town's veterinarian, brought a new wave of energy to their corner of the center. She knelt beside Jack, her experienced hands gentle as she examined his injuries. "Well, hello there, hero," she said warmly. "Let's see what you've done to yourself this time." Jack submitted to the examination with unusual patience, though his eyes never left Ethan. The former fire chief found himself holding his breath until Diana finally sat back with a relieved sigh. Bruised ribs, some muscle strain, and a few cuts that needed cleaning, but nothing broken. "He'll need rest and medication for a few weeks, but he'll make a full recovery." She paused, scratching Jack behind the ears. "Though knowing him, keeping him still will be the real challenge." Lucy had made her way over, still wrapped in her blanket. "I can help with that," she offered. I can read to him and make sure he rests. Mom, can we visit every day? Rachel looked at Ethan questioningly. He nodded, something warming in his chest at the idea. Our door's always open. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I think Jack would miss his story time. The morning continued to advance, bringing with it the first assessment teams and relief workers. The community center began to empty as people either returned to their homes or sought temporary shelter with family and friends. Chief Anderson approached Ethan again, this time with an official-looking document. Been holding on to this for 5 years, he said, holding out the paper. Thought maybe now was the time. Ethan took the document, recognizing it immediately, his reinstatement papers, never filed after his resignation. He looked at Jack, then at Lucy and Rachel, seeing in their faces the change that one night had brought to all their lives. What do you think, partner? He asked Jack. The Labrador's tail thumped decisively against the floor. Lucy tugged at his sleeve. Does this mean you'll be helping people again? Like Jack does? Like we both do, Ethan corrected gently. Partners. As he signed the reinstatement papers, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the room in shades of gold. Outside, Cedar Haven began the long process of recovery, its streets still flooded but its spirit unbroken. The storm had taken much from them, but it had given something too, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are simply choosing to begin again. Jack rested his head on Ethan's knee, finally allowing himself to drift off to sleep. In his dreams, he chased not rabbits or balls, but the endless possibilities of tomorrow, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, he and his partner would face it together. A week after the storm, Cedar Haven was slowly coming back to life. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind mud-caked streets and waterlogged buildings, but also revealing the resilient spirit of the community. Throughout the town, neighbors helped neighbors clear debris, repair homes, and rebuild what was lost. On the front porch of Ethan's house, Jack lay on his favorite cushion, supervising the cleanup efforts on their street. His injuries were healing well, though the forced rest clearly tested his patience. Lucy sat beside him, taking her self-appointed role as his caretaker very seriously. And then, she read from her notebook, the brave dog showed everyone that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. She looked up from her writing. Do you think my essay about you will win the school contest, Jack? The Labrador's tail wagged encouragingly, and Lucy beamed. She had returned to school 2 days ago, along with most of Cedar Haven's children, but spent every afternoon with Jack, reading stories and working on her essay about the night of the storm. Across the street, Rachel was directing a group of volunteers helping to repair her house. The water damage had been extensive, but the community had rallied around them. Even now, Dorothy Chin was organizing a work schedule while Virginia Winters coordinated meals for the volunteers from her wheelchair-accessible van. Ethan emerged from his house in his restored fire department uniform, the brass freshly polished. Jack's ears perked up immediately, and he attempted to rise despite Dr. Reynolds' strict orders for rest. Stay, boy, Ethan commanded gently. Not yet. Another week, remember. Lucy scratched behind Jack's ears soothingly. Don't worry, I'll tell you everything that happens at the ceremony. Mom's letting me skip my afternoon classes to be there. The ceremony in question was more than just a formal reinstatement. Chief Anderson had decided that Cedar Haven needed to properly honor its heroes, both human and canine. The story of that night, of a dog's unwavering courage and a man's redemption, had spread far beyond their small coastal town, inspiring others with its message of hope and second chances. Ready for your big day? Rachel called out, crossing the street with a thermos of coffee. She'd taken to bringing Ethan coffee every morning, a small gesture that spoke of deeper changes in their lives. Almost, Ethan replied, accepting the thermos gratefully. Just need to finish Jack's surprise first. Lucy perked up. A surprise? What kind of surprise? You'll see at the ceremony, Ethan smiled, sharing a knowing look with Rachel. Speaking of which, we should head out soon. Jack, be good for Mrs. Winters. She'll be staying with you until we get back. Jack whined softly but settled back on his cushion. Virginia was already making her way up the porch ramp that Robert and the other volunteers had built days after the storm, one of many small improvements that had made their neighborhood more accessible and connected. The ceremony at Town Hall drew a crowd that spilled out onto the still-drying streets. Chief Anderson stood at the podium, recounting the events of that fateful night. But it was Ethan's speech that captured everyone's attention. "A week ago, I was a man hiding from his past," he began, his voice strong and clear. "I thought I'd lost my courage, my purpose. But I had a partner who never lost faith." He gestured to the large photo of Jack displayed beside the podium. "He taught me that true bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about moving forward despite our fears." Lucy sat in the front row between her mother and Dorothy Chen, proudly holding Splash, who sported a new ribbon matching Jack's official fire department colors. "Today, I'm not just returning to the fire department," Ethan continued. "I'm announcing the creation of Cedar Haven's first K-9 search and rescue training program." He unveiled a blueprint showing plans for a dedicated training facility. Jack's courage saved lives that night, but he's not the only dog with that potential. This program will train more rescue dogs and their handlers, ensuring that Cedar Haven is better prepared for whatever challenges we face. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Lucy bounced in her seat, already imagining future training sessions and the stories they would inspire. Back at home, Jack's ears twitched at the distant sound of cheering carried on the breeze. Virginia smiled, watching him from her position near the porch railing. "You know they're talking about you, don't you, sweet boy?" The Labrador's tail wagged modestly, but his eyes remained fixed in the direction of Town Hall, waiting for his family to return. Because that's what they had become, not just Ethan now, but Lucy and Rachel too, and in a way, the entire community of Cedar Haven. As the ceremony concluded, Ethan found himself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Dorothy Chen proudly showed him the list of volunteers who had already signed up to help with the K-9 program. Robert Winters offered his expertise in designing accessible features for the training facility. "Mr. Walker," Lucy called out, pushing through the crowd. "Can I help train the new dogs? Jack can be like their teacher, and I can be his assistant." Ethan lifted her up, his heart full of the joy that had been missing from his life for so long. "I think Jack would like that very much. After all, you're practically an expert in dog heroes now." Rachel watched them with warm eyes. "Speaking of Jack, we should head back. He's probably worn a path in your porch waiting for us." The drive home took them through streets still bearing the scars of the storm, but also showing signs of renewal. New trees were being planted, homes were being repaired, and everywhere they looked, people were working together with renewed purpose. As they pulled into the driveway, Jack's excited barking welcomed them home. He still favored his injured side, but his spirit was as strong as ever. Lucy ran to him, eager to share every detail of the ceremony. Ethan hung his uniform jacket carefully, then joined them on the porch. The setting sun painted Cedar Haven in shades of hope, promising better days ahead. Jack leaned against his leg, a steady presence that had guided him back to who he was meant to be. "You know," Rachel said softly, watching Lucy demonstrate to Jack how she had clapped during the ceremony, "some people say storms come to disrupt our lives. But sometimes, they come to clear a path to something better." Ethan nodded, understanding completely. The storm had taken much from Cedar Haven, but it had given back something invaluable, a reminder that the strongest foundations are built not of brick and mortar, but of courage, love, and the unwavering belief in second chances. 3 months after the storm, the Cedar Haven K-9 Training Center was taking shape on what had once been an unused lot behind the fire station. The autumn sun glinted off new equipment as Jack, fully recovered and energetic as ever, demonstrated water rescue techniques to a group of eager K-9 trainees and their handlers. Lucy sat on the newly constructed observation deck, her notebook open as she documented everything. At 12 weeks into the program, she had appointed herself the unofficial historian of Cedar Haven's K-9 unit, filling pages with observations, sketches, and stories of each dog's progress. "Notice how Jack maintains eye contact with his partner," Ethan explained to the group, moving through the training pool with confident strides. "The bond between handler and dog is crucial. These aren't just working relationships, they're partnerships built on absolute trust." Among the trainees was a young German shepherd named Storm, a name that had given everyone pause at first but seemed fitting now. Her handler, Andrea Martinez, was a rookie firefighter who had volunteered during Cedar Haven's recovery efforts. "Chief Walker," Andrea called out, using Ethan's restored title, Storm still hesitating at the deep end. "Any advice?" Ethan smiled, remembering Jack's own struggle with deep water years ago. "Lucy, want to share what Jack taught us about overcoming fear?" Lucy beamed, flipping to a specific page in her notebook. "Jack says it's okay to be scared," she began, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned this lesson firsthand. "The brave part isn't not being afraid, it's trusting your partner to help you through it." Rachel, who had started volunteering at the training center between her work shifts, watched proudly as her daughter addressed the group. The storm had changed Lucy, transforming her from a quiet, uncertain child into a confident young girl who had found her voice and purpose. "That's exactly right," Ethan agreed. "Andrea, try entering the water first. Let Storm see that you trust her to follow. Just like that night when Jack." He paused, sharing a look with his partner. They rarely spoke directly about the night of the storm, but its lessons informed everything they did. Jack barked encouragingly as Andrea waded into the deeper water. Storm paced the edge, whining softly, then made her decision. With a graceful leap, she joined her handler, swimming strongly despite her previous hesitation. "Perfect," Ethan called out. "That's what we want to see. Trust-building confidence." The training center had become more than just a facility, it was a symbol of Cedar Haven's transformation. The observation deck doubled as a community gathering space, where residents often stopped by to watch the training sessions and share stories. Dorothy Chin had started a youth education program, teaching children about water safety and emergency preparedness. "You know," Dorothy remarked to Rachel as they watched another successful training exercise, "in 30 years of teaching, I've never seen anything quite like this. It's not just about the dogs anymore, it's about the whole community learning to be brave together." Robert and Virginia Winters had become regular fixtures at the center too. Robert's engineering experience had proved invaluable in designing accessible features throughout the facility, ensuring everyone could participate in or observe the training. "Remember when we thought the storm had taken everything?" Virginia mused, watching Storm and Andrea celebrate their breakthrough. "Turns out it gave us something we didn't even know we needed." As the training session wound down, Lucy rushed to help Ethan and Jack demonstrate proper cool-down exercises for the dogs. Her presence had become an integral part of the program, her natural ability to connect with both animals and people making her an unexpected but valuable asset. "Mom, did you see?" Lucy called out excitedly. "Storm did it. Just like in my story about Jack." Rachel nodded, remembering the essay that now hung framed in the training center's main office, Lucy's award-winning piece about the night Jack had shown an entire town the true meaning of courage. Later that evening, as the sun set over Cedar Haven, Ethan sat on his porch with Jack, reviewing training notes. The Labrador's gray muzzle showed the passage of time, but his eyes were as bright and determined as ever. "You started something amazing, boy," Ethan said softly, scratching behind Jack's ears. "Look at what you built." The sound of laughter drew their attention. Lucy and Rachel were crossing the street, carrying what had become their traditional Friday night contribution to dinner. The weekly family meals had started as a thank you for Jack's heroism but had evolved into something more meaningful, a celebration of the bonds formed in crisis and strengthened in recovery. "Mr. Walker." Lucy called out, holding up her notebook. "I wrote a new story about Storm today. Want to hear it?" "Of course," Ethan replied, making room on the porch swing. Jack settled at their feet as Lucy began to read, her voice bringing to life another tale of courage and trust. Rachel and Ethan exchanged glances over Lucy's head, sharing the quiet understanding of how far they'd all come. The storm that had threatened to destroy their lives had instead given them a new kind of family, bound together by more than blood or circumstance. Through the evening air came the distant sound of emergency sirens, not a source of fear anymore, but a reminder of the important work being done. Jack's ears perked up out of habit, but he remained contentedly in place, knowing his legacy was in good hands. The K-9 program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with neighboring towns now sending handlers and dogs for training. But its true success wasn't measured in numbers or certifications, it was measured in the confidence of a young girl finding her voice, in the renewed purpose of a man who had lost his way, and in the unshakable bonds formed between humans and dogs who had learned to be brave together. 1 year after the storm that changed Cedar Haven forever, the town gathered for a special ceremony at the K-9 Training Center. The facility had grown into something remarkable, a testament to the power of second chances and unwavering courage. Banners celebrating the first graduating class of rescue dogs and their handlers hung proudly, moving gently in the coastal breeze. Jack sat at attention beside Ethan, his position of honor marked by a special red and gold collar. Though his muzzle had grown a bit grayer and his movements slightly slower, his eyes still shone with the same determination that had saved Lucy's life that fateful night. On his other side sat Lucy herself, now 11, clutching a leather-bound book, her completed collection of stories about Cedar Haven's K-9 heroes. "Today marks not just a graduation," Chief Anderson began, addressing the assembled crowd, but a celebration of transformation. 1 year ago, a storm threatened to break our town. Instead, it showed us our strength. In the front row, Rachel squeezed Lucy's hand, remembering the terror and triumph of that night. They still lived across the street from Ethan and Jack, but the neighborhood had changed. The one simple street had become the heart of Cedar Haven's renewed community spirit, with gardens replacing bare lawns and ramps making every home accessible. "Our first graduating class," Anderson continued, "represents everything we learned from two remarkable partners." He gestured to Ethan and Jack. "They showed us that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about moving forward together despite our fears." 6 handler dog teams stood ready for their certification, including Andrea Martinez and Storm. The German Shepherd had overcome her fear of deep water to become one of the program's star pupils. Lucy had documented every step of their journey in her book, which was being published by the local press as an inspirational guide for future K-9 programs. Ethan rose to address the crowd, Jack moving in perfect sync with him. "A year ago, I thought my days of service were over. I was wrong." He paused, looking down at his partner. "Jack never gave up, not on me, not on anyone who needed help. He taught me that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone else to help us find our way back." Lucy stepped forward then, opening her book to a marked page. "I'd like to read something, if that's okay." At Ethan's encouraging nod, she began, "Heroes don't always wear capes or medals. Sometimes they have 4 legs and fur, and hearts big enough to save not just one person, but an entire town. They teach us that love is the greatest courage of all, and that family isn't just about blood, it's about the bonds we forge when we're brave enough to let others in." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience as Lucy finished reading. Dorothy Chen, who had helped edit the book, beamed with teacher's pride. Robert and Virginia Winters, now regular volunteers at the center, held hands tightly, remembering their own rescue. The ceremony continued with the presentation of certifications, each new team ready to carry forward the legacy that Jack had started. But the most touching moment came when Lucy unveiled a surprise, a bronze statue of Jack that would stand at the center's entrance, its plaque reading, "For the dog who taught Cedar Haven how to be brave." Jack studied his likeness with typical modesty, more interested in the treats Lucy had smuggled into her pocket than in his immortalized image. But when Andrea and Storm stepped forward for their certification, he sat at attention again, every inch the dignified mentor. After the ceremony, as the sun began to set over Cedar Haven, a small group gathered on Ethan's porch, the same porch where Jack had first sensed the approaching storm 1 year ago. Rachel brought her famous apple pie, Dorothy contributed her secret recipe lemonade, and the Winters shared stories that made everyone laugh despite having heard them dozens of times before. Lucy sat on the porch steps between Jack and Storm, reading to them from her book. Andrea joined them, along with other handlers and their dogs, creating a picture of the extended family that had grown from one act of courage. "You know what I just realized?" Rachel said softly to Ethan as they watched the scene. "The storm didn't just change Cedar Haven, it healed it. All of us." Ethan nodded, watching as Jack gently nuzzled Lucy's hand when she reached a particularly emotional part of the story. "He knew all along, I think. That's why he never gave up on any of us." A light rain began to fall, not the destructive force of that terrible night, but a gentle reminder of nature's capacity for renewal. None of the dogs showed any anxiety. They had learned, like their humans, that some of life's greatest gifts come after its biggest challenges. Lucy closed her book and looked up at the gathering clouds. "It's okay," she said, scratching behind Jack's ears. "We know what to do now. We just have to be brave together." Jack's tail thumped against the porch boards in agreement. He might be older now, more mentor than active rescuer, but his legacy lived on in every graduate of the program, in every life touched by their service, and in the unshakable bonds forged between handlers and their dogs. As evening settled over Cedar Haven, the lights of the training center glowed warmly in the distance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rescues, new opportunities to be brave. But tonight was for remembering how far they'd come, from a storm that threatened to tear them apart to the family they'd become. Ethan looked at his partner, his friend, his hero. "Ready to head in, boy?" Jack stood, moving with the dignified grace of a dog who knew his purpose. Together, they led their extended family into the house that had become a home for so many. The storm had changed their lives, but love had transformed them. And in the end, that was the greatest rescue of all.